Hey guys, tonight we're heading straight into the thick of it. You're stepping through the heavy wooden gates of a medieval castle, and before you've even got your bearings, there's a deafening clang as the portcullis crashes down behind you. The ground vibrates under your feet, dust trickles from the stone above, and the booming sound of the chains rattling echoes through the courtyard. That's it. You're in. And you're not getting out until this siege is over, or until, well, you don't make it that far. Honestly, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice inside the gates isn't the grand architecture or the protective towers, it's the faces. Staring, anxious faces. Everyone seems to know something you don't. The enemy has been spotted on the horizon, banners flapping, siege engines creaking forward like some slow, unstoppable tide. It's the kind of dread that settles in your stomach and doesn't leave. You try to convince yourself this will be over quickly, but the man next to you, a wiry old guard with more missing teeth than remaining, mutters that the last siege here lasted 16 months. You don't have 16 months of patience. Honestly, you don't even have 16 days of food in you. Someone shouts from the wall, and suddenly there's a flurry of movement. The outer gatehouse, the one you just walked past, is being locked and barred, and the thick oak timbers groan as iron bolts slide into place. Chains rattle as the drawbridge comes up, creaking, then slamming against its frame. The air smells of damp wood, hot metal, and fear. Historians still argue whether most castle sieges were actually short, violent affairs or long drawn-out tests of endurance. The truth is probably somewhere in between, but as you watch men with crossbows take their stations and women usher children into storage cellars, you realize this isn't going to be a quick in-and-out skirmish. And here's your first quirky tidbit. You're standing just a few feet from the murder holes, gaps in the ceiling above the gate where defenders could drop stones, sand, or yes, boiling water onto anyone who tried to force their way in. Forget that movie trope about endless cauldrons of boiling oil. That stuff was expensive. Water or heated sand did the job just fine, and was a lot cheaper to replace. A guard shoves you toward the inner courtyard, barking something about making yourself useful. You find yourself moving past stacked barrels, sacks of grain, and bundles of arrows. The supplies have been hauled in from nearby villages over the past week, but you can already see and smell the problem. The grain sacks are dusty, some split open at the seams, and the barrels aren't all full of drinkable water. In the panic of preparing for the siege, not everything made it in fresh. That'll matter soon. You pass a group of villagers clutching baskets of possessions. Pots, loaves of bread, even a terrified-looking goose. Everyone's eyes keep flicking toward the outer wall where the enemy is setting up campfires just far enough away to be safe from arrows. That's the unsettling part. They're not rushing the gate. They're just waiting. Siege warfare was often less about glorious charges and more about starving the defenders out. You can almost hear the patience in their slow, deliberate movements. By now, you've been in the castle less than an hour, but the atmosphere has already shifted. The sense of open space is gone. The walls feel closer. Even the air seems heavier, as if the stones themselves know what's coming. Someone is ringing the warning bell from the highest tower, not frantically but steadily, as if to remind everyone, we're trapped in here together. You make your way to the battlements, climbing a steep, narrow staircase worn smooth by generations of boots. Up here, the view is both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Beyond the walls, the rolling fields you crossed earlier are dotted with figures. Soldiers, tents, siege towers under construction. A lumbering trebuchet already in place. The enemy is wasting no time. Down below, inside the castle, the mood is tense but eerily calm. People know their roles. The blacksmith is already hammering out arrowheads, sparks flying against the dim light. Children carry bundles of firewood to the kitchens. Guards oil the hinges of the inner gates. Everyone is doing something because if you stop, you think too much. About hunger, about fear, about the possibility that the next sunrise might be your last. And here's the mainstream fact to keep in mind. Despite what romanticized tales might tell you, most castle defenders during sieges weren't professional soldiers. They were farmers, craftsmen, servants, ordinary people suddenly trapped in extraordinary danger. You're one of them now. A shout from below draws your attention. The enemy has sent forward a small group, not to attack but to plant their banners in clear sight. A silent statement. We're here, we're ready, and we can wait as long as it takes. The old guard next to you spits over the wall and mutters, "We'll see who's got the longer patience." You try to match his defiance, but you can already feel the unease curling at the back of your neck. Night will fall soon, and with it, the first true test. The long, sleepless hours of listening for movement in the dark, of waiting for the unknown. But for now, you just grip the cold stone of the wall, take in the scene, and try not to think about the fact that the last open gate you saw is now bolted shut behind you. The good news is that the castle walls are thick, the gates are locked, and the enemy can't just stroll in. The bad news? You're going to have to eat. Not right now, but soon. And when you do, you'll have to eat whatever the garrison commander decides you're allowed to have. You wander toward the storage rooms tucked beneath the keep, ducking under low stone arches as your boots scrape against uneven flagstones. The air here is cool and damp, which would be nice if it didn't also smell faintly of mildew and something sour. You follow the flicker of a torchlight and find a pair of castle servants already at work. They're counting sacks of grain, barrels of salted fish, and small baskets of root vegetables. One woman is scratching notes onto a wax tablet, her face set in a permanent frown as she mutters numbers under her breath. Historians still argue whether siege rations were ever planned with precision or if people simply ate until they ran out, but in this place, you can tell they're counting every last turnip. The commander leans in through the doorway, glances at you, and says something that makes the woman at the tablet laugh. The kind of laugh that doesn't mean anything is funny. You catch sight of the bread. Well, what they call bread. These are hard, flat loaves made from coarse flour, sometimes with bits of grit in it. That grit isn't a seasoning choice, it's from millstones wearing down into the flour. It'll wear your teeth down too if you're here long enough. People joke about castle jaw, but when you bite into something that could double as masonry, you understand why. A servant gestures to a nearby barrel. You peek in and immediately wish you hadn't. Salted fish, packed tightly, their eyes cloudy, scales dulled to a sickly silver gray. The salt is supposed to preserve them, but the smell tells you some are already going bad. They'll be eaten anyway. Under siege, there's no such thing as being picky. You overhear a bit of gossip as you loiter. Apparently, some of the meat is already being rationed only to the soldiers. Ordinary townsfolk will get bread and whatever vegetables are left. Children are given milk if it's available, but the castle's goats aren't producing much this time of year. You make a mental note. If you see someone guarding a steaming bowl of broth, they're probably holding liquid gold. And here's your quirky tidbit for the night. Medieval folk sometimes bulked out bread dough with crushed peas or beans during sieges, not for taste but to make it stretch. The result was a loaf that looked edible from a distance but had the texture of damp clay. You'll have the pleasure of finding that out in a few days. In the far corner of the storeroom, a boy no older than 12 is carefully stacking apples. Some are fresh and red, others are soft and mottled, their skins bruised. He doesn't throw the bad ones away, instead he tucks them in a separate basket. Those will be turned into cider, which can be stored longer and is safer to drink than plain water. The irony hits you, alcohol might keep you alive here. As you leave the storeroom, a soldier stops you and presses a small wooden token into your palm. It's carved with a crude symbol, a loaf of bread. Your ration marker, he says flatly. Show it when the stewards call. You wonder if you should feel reassured or insulted. Outside, in the courtyard, people are already talking about the coming weeks. Some swear the siege will break in a fortnight. Others mutter about the last time this enemy came, when people resorted to boiling leather for soup. You try to laugh it off, but the way they avoid eye contact makes you uneasy. By sundown, the first round of rationing begins. A line forms near the kitchens, everyone clutching their tokens. You shuffle forward slowly, the smell of baking bread teasing your empty stomach. When it's your turn, a ladle of thin stew is slopped into a wooden bowl, mostly turnip, a few strands of cabbage, and a suspiciously unidentifiable chunk of something chewy. Alongside it, a small piece of bread so dense it could sink a boat. You thank the steward because not thanking them might mean smaller portions tomorrow. As you eat, you notice the subtle shift in conversation around you. People talk less about the enemy now and more about food, how to make it last, how to trade for better portions, which guards can be bribed for an extra ladle of stew. It's only the first day of the siege, but already, survival has shifted from fighting the enemy outside to outlasting hunger inside. And you can't shake the feeling that you've just had one of your best meals for a long, long time. The next morning begins not with the sound of birdsong, but with the sharp creak of the castle's main gates being reinforced. Someone's hammering extra iron bolts into place. You roll off your straw mattress, and I use the word mattress generously, brushing off bits of hay that somehow find their way into your hair and clothes no matter how tightly you wrap yourself in blankets. The air in your small chamber is bitterly cold. Your breath drifts in pale clouds as you move, and you can hear the distant chatter of guards changing shifts. Somewhere down in the courtyard, a blacksmith's hammer rings against metal, probably fixing armor or sharpening pikes. The siege hasn't even been going a week, and already, everyone is working as if the final assault is tomorrow. You make your way toward the wall walk, the narrow path atop the outer curtain wall where sentries keep watch. A soldier, eyes rimmed with fatigue, greets you with a half-hearted nod. He points toward the horizon. There, in the distance, is the enemy, or at least the suggestion of them, dark shapes moving slowly between clusters of tents. Banners flap in the wind, their colors dulled by distance. Every so often you catch a glint of sunlight bouncing off a helmet or spear tip. It's unsettling, not because they're doing anything yet, but because they're not. A veteran archer leans against the battlements beside you, munching on what looks like dried meat. He chews for a long moment, then says, "They're waiting. They've got time. More than we do." You glance at his bow. The string is frayed and the wood has been patched in 2 places. You wonder how many arrows he actually has left in that quiver. Midday brings an unexpected distraction. A runner bursts into the courtyard, panting, and announces that the enemy has sent a herald to speak with the castle's commander. Everyone stops what they're doing. Even the chickens scratching in the dirt seem to sense something's up. The meeting takes place at the outer gate, with the portcullis still firmly lowered. The herald, wrapped in a fine cloak, face half hidden by a hood, shouts their demands across the gap. They're offering mercy if the castle surrenders immediately. In return, they'll spare the lives of the garrison, though the townsfolk might not get such generous terms. The commander listens silently, then shouts back something about honor and God's will. The herald's expression never changes, but when they turn to leave, you think you see the faintest smile. By late afternoon, the atmosphere changes. Archers are ordered to keep arrows nocked. Buckets of water are stationed at regular intervals along the walls, not for drinking but in case of fire arrows. The blacksmith works furiously, his anvil ringing in frantic rhythm. Children are herded indoors, and even the cooks move more quickly, ladling stew into bowls without their usual grumbling. Then, just as dusk begins to fall, the first test comes. From somewhere in the enemy camp, a single catapult launches a rock the size of a small cart. It sails through the air with a low, menacing hum before smashing into the outer wall. The impact shakes the ground beneath your feet. Dust showers down from the stonework above. People scream, though the wall holds, for now. A second shot follows, then a third. Each crash feels like a giant's fist pounding against the castle. The soldiers' shouts mix with the rumble of impact and the clatter of falling stone. Somewhere nearby, a guard drops his spear in panic, the sound sharp against the chaos. When night finally settles in, the bombardment stops. The enemy has made their point. They're close enough and strong enough to strike at will. They don't need to attack outright. Not yet. They're going to let fear do some of the work for them. Back inside the castle, people whisper about the damage. The stone masons will patch what they can by torchlight, but there's talk of a section of the outer wall being weaker now. If the enemy finds it, well, best not to think about that while trying to sleep. You lie back on your straw bedding, staring at the shadowed ceiling, and realize something. Tomorrow, the real siege begins. If you want, I can make Section 4 shift from battle tension into the slow psychological wear of being trapped inside the castle. which will keep the sleepy, immersive tone but also keep the listener hooked. That's where the boring history for sleep style really shines. Morning arrives without the warmth of sunlight. The sky is the color of old wool, heavy with clouds that threaten snow. The air inside the castle feels stale, too many people breathing the same space for too many days. The fires in the great hall burn low, more from rationing than from neglect. Your breakfast is a thin porridge, the kind that leaves you wondering if it's meant for humans or livestock. Someone stirs it with a wooden spoon that's been worn down on one side, and you can see bits of husk floating on the surface. A few children complain, but the adults simply eat in silence. Food is already becoming something you don't discuss too loudly. The walls echo differently now. Instead of the lively sounds of a functioning community, there's a hollow, tense rhythm, boots shuffling along parapets, the occasional clink of armor, the scratch of quill on parchment as someone keeps tallies of supplies. It's strange how quickly the mind adapts to confinement. The open world beyond the walls starts to feel like a distant memory, as though it belongs to someone else's life. You pass the time doing small, repetitive tasks, fetching water from the cistern, mending torn clothing, sharpening knives even if they're not needed. The point isn't utility, it's distraction. Anything to keep your thoughts from circling the same questions. How long can we hold out? When will they attack again? In the afternoon, rumors begin to spread. Someone claims the enemy is digging tunnels beneath the walls. Another insists they saw smoke rising from inside the outer courtyard, a sign of sabotage. The captain of the guard swats these stories down, but you can see the tension in his jaw. Even without proof, the whispers erode confidence. By evening, the cold deepens. The great hall becomes the only truly warm place, but even that warmth is thin, like it's struggling to reach you. People cluster near the hearth, speaking in low voices or staring into the flames. A lute player strums a slow, wandering melody in the corner. Normally, this would be the moment in a story where spirits lift, but here it feels more like a lullaby for the trapped. As you sit by the fire, you realize that the real enemy might not be the army outside at all. It might be the waiting. The slow drip of days blending together. The way every sound makes you tense, every shadow at the gate feels like it's about to move. When you finally retreat to your bedding, the night is silent. Not the peaceful kind of silence, the kind that feels like it's holding its breath. Somewhere out there, the enemy is doing the same. And tomorrow, the waiting will begin again. You wake to the dull thud of a distant impact, the kind that travels through stone before it reaches your ears. It's not your imagination. The enemy has rolled another siege engine into place during the night. The room is cold, the dampness clinging to your clothes from yesterday's mist, and when you sit up, your muscles complain like an old mule. You stretch, but it does little to ease the stiffness. Down in the courtyard, men and women scurry like ants, carrying buckets of water, bundles of arrows, and strange lumps wrapped in cloth, likely more pitch-soaked fuel for the next counterattack. A boy no older than 12 darts past you, his arms full of fletched shafts. He's quick, but not quick enough to avoid the veteran archer who shouts at him for dropping one. Life under siege turns everyone into a taskmaster. As you climb the narrow spiral staircase to the battlements, the scent of smoke hits you. The night watch must have kept braziers burning to light the walls, and now the air is thick with it. You peer out through the crenellations. There it is, the siege tower, a hulking silhouette against the pale morning fog. Wooden, iron-bound, and crawling forward on groaning wheels. You can almost feel the engineers on the other side urging it closer with ropes and curses. Historians still argue whether medieval siege towers were more psychological than practical. But right now, staring at one heading straight for your home, you're leaning toward terrifying. The defenders beside you are already adjusting the angle of a mangonel, one of those cumbersome stone throwers that looks more like an untrustworthy catapult cousin. You've seen what happens when they misfire? Last week, one launched a boulder barely 5 feet before smashing into the wall beneath it. Everyone laughed nervously, then went silent. The captain of the guard shuffles past, wrapped in a patched cloak, his beard bristling with frost. He orders hot sand to be heated. Yes, sand. You'd always imagined boiling oil was the weapon of choice in sieges, but here's the quirky truth. Oil was expensive, too precious to waste on enemies when you could cook with it. Sand, on the other hand, could be heated until it glowed and then poured through murder holes, slipping into armor gaps and turning plate and mail into ovens. Nasty. Effective. Below, you can see the villagers, what's left of them, huddled inside the inner bailey. They've been moved closer to the keep for safety, which means they're sleeping in hastily built shelters, or in some cases under overturned carts. Privacy doesn't exist here anymore. Neither does quiet. A baby cries somewhere in the crowd, and the sound carries up to you over the wind. Your stomach growls. You're lucky enough to get bread twice a day, though it's been getting smaller and harder with each passing morning. The quartermaster swears the grain stores will last another month, but you've noticed the pigeons disappearing from the rooftops. Someone's been catching them. You can't really blame them. Then comes the creak. That slow, steady, unnerving groan of wood and rope being strained to their limit. The enemy is loading their own catapult. You feel your throat tighten as you watch a massive stone rise like a child's toy in the sling. It arcs through the air, for a moment almost graceful, before smashing into the wall 20 feet to your left. The impact sends a shiver through the battlements, dislodging a few pebbles that ping down the stairs. One defender swears they saw rats fleeing into the moat before the shot landed. Maybe the rodents know something you don't. But no one's leaving, not yet. The lord of the castle has promised that relief forces are on their way. No one can say exactly when, though, and whispers have started to spread that they might not come at all. Still, work goes on. The blacksmith is reforging bent arrowheads, the cooper is repairing water barrels, and somewhere deep in the kitchens, someone is boiling up a stew that smells faintly of turnip and mostly of hope. You can't help but think about what it would take for you to survive this siege. Weeks more of cold nights, dwindling rations, and the constant threat of something heavy and very fast smashing into you. But here you are, pulling your cloak tighter, pretending the wind isn't finding every gap in the fabric. The siege tower creeps closer. The day drags on in the slow, grinding rhythm of a siege. Nothing happening, and yet everything happening at once. The enemy never rushes. They just push forward inch by inch, like a tide that doesn't care whether you're ready. You're stationed now on the west wall, where the wind comes howling in from the open fields. It cuts through your clothes and makes your fingers ache around the haft of a spear you don't really know how to use. The veteran next to you, a wiry man with a face like old leather, tells you that if the tower reaches the wall, you aim for the gaps in armor, neck, armpit, back of the knee. He says it like he's talking about chopping onions. Below, the moat glimmers dully. You remember when it was just a defensive ditch filled with stagnant water and frogs. Now it's littered with floating debris from failed enemy attempts to bridge it, planks, broken ladders, even a wheel from some unfortunate siege cart. Crows have claimed it as their private dining hall. A cry goes up from the far wall. You squint, but the haze makes it hard to see. Then the sound reaches you, a faint drumming like rain on a roof, only it's not rain. It's arrows loosed in a thick volley. The defenders crouch low, shields raised, and you hear the clatter of shafts hitting stone. One unlucky fellow takes a hit to the thigh. He's dragged away before you can even see his face. The air smells of damp earth and wood smoke, and somewhere underneath, a sharp tang of metal. That's the forge again, still going, still churning out spearheads and nails, the heartbeat of the castle in these times. The blacksmith doesn't speak much, but you've heard him muttering under his breath about the iron running low. A pigeon flutters down onto the parapet beside you. Its thin, feathers patchy, eyes darting. You reach for it, thinking of the empty stew pot in the kitchen, but it's gone in a heartbeat, winging off toward the horizon. You watch it until it disappears into the fog. A part of you wishes you could follow. The enemy camp is just visible beyond the lines. Tents in muted colors, banners drooping in the damp. Fires burn low, and you can imagine the smell of whatever they're cooking. Probably better than your bread and onion. You wonder if they're laughing over there, telling stories, or if they're just as cold and miserable as you. Then the horn blows. Deep, resonant, vibrating in your chest. The kind of sound that says, now it begins. The siege tower lurches forward again, closer this time. You can see the crude iron plating on the front, meant to protect the soldiers inside. Arrows bounce off it harmlessly, some breaking mid-air. The men manning the mangonel curse under their breath. They've only got a few more shots before they'll have to fetch more stones. From somewhere above, a bucket tips, hot sand cascading down onto the men pushing the tower. Even at this distance you can hear the screaming. They break formation for a moment, but the tower doesn't stop. Nothing stops. A thin drizzle starts to fall, just enough to seep into your clothes and make the cold worse. The captain shouts for everyone to hold their positions, but his voice is barely audible over the groan of the siege tower's wheels and the rhythmic pounding of the enemy's battering ram on the far gate. You glance down into the courtyard. The villagers are huddled tighter than ever, some praying, some staring blankly at the walls as if they can will them to hold. Children are being herded into the keep itself, away from the danger, but you know deep down that there's no such thing as away in a siege. There's just not yet. Another stone flies from the enemy's catapult, this one smashing into the west wall so close to you that the shockwave rattles your teeth. Bits of mortar sting your face. The veteran next to you doesn't flinch. He just tightens his grip on the spear and says, "They're getting their range now." Somewhere far off you hear the faint roll of thunder. Or maybe that's just the drums. The drizzle thickens. The cold deepens. And the siege tower keeps coming. By nightfall, the walls are slick with rain, and the torches sputter in the damp air. The siege tower has stopped just short of the moat for now, looming like a shadowy monolith against the dark horizon. It's not relief, more like the feeling of a wolf sitting just outside your door, waiting for the right moment. You're sent down from the wall to fetch more arrows from the storeroom. The stairwell spirals tightly, the air warm and close from all the bodies passing through. You catch snatches of conversation. Someone complaining about their boots falling apart, another man arguing about whether the enemy has more food than you do. No one talks about winning. In the storeroom, the quartermaster is half buried in crates and sacks, his beard bristling with damp crumbs from whatever he just ate. He hands you a bundle of arrows and mutters something about saving the good ones for the longbowmen. You wonder if these are the bad ones? As you make your way back up, you pass the chapel. Inside, candles flicker in front of a small altar. A priest kneels in silence, hands clasped, lips moving without sound. A few villagers linger there, their eyes darting to the door every time a noise echoes from outside. Back on the wall, the veteran is gone. In his place stands a younger man with pale hair and a nervous way of holding his crossbow. You set down the arrows, glance out over the field, and see the enemy camp glowing faintly in the distance. Little pockets of orange light in a sea of black. The rain has eased, leaving the ground shining under a waning moon. Hours pass in quiet watch. Your stomach growls, but no one leaves their post. The only sounds are the occasional cough, the creak of leather armor, and the distant murmur of voices drifting up from the courtyard. Somewhere far off, a dog barks once and is silent. Then, movement. Not the slow lumber of siege equipment this time, but small shapes slipping along the shadows near the moat. You narrow your eyes. Sappers maybe. Men with shovels and picks, creeping forward to weaken the wall's foundations. You signal to the nearest guard, and soon a whispered message is passed along the parapet. The captain appears a moment later, eyes sharp despite the late hour. Orders are given in hushed tones. Archers lean over the wall, loosing a few warning shots. The shapes scatter, vanishing back into the night, but you know they'll try again. Sapping is a patient art, done in inches over days until suddenly the wall above gives way. The rest of the shift is uneventful. You keep watch, scanning the ground for any flicker of movement, but it's just the wind in the tall grass now. You start to notice the smell of damp rope, the faint metallic tang of the arrowheads in the quiver by your side. Little details grow sharp in the long quiet. Near dawn, a horn sounds, not the deep, ominous one from the enemy, but a short, sharp call from inside the walls. You head down to the courtyard to find a small group gathered near the gate. A patrol has returned from a risky night sortie, slipping out through a sally port to burn one of the enemy's supply carts. They've come back wet, tired, and with a single bag of grain as their prize. It's not much, but it's something. The cook takes the grain straight to the kitchen, and by the time the first pale light hits the walls, you can smell it boiling. Thin porridge, watery but warm. You eat it slowly, savoring each mouthful, knowing it might be the last hot thing you get for days. Outside the walls, the enemy is stirring. Banners rise in the mist, the clang of armor and weapons echoing faintly. The siege tower sits silent, but further along, the battering ram has started up again, a steady thud like a drumbeat. The sound lodges itself in your skull, impossible to ignore. The captain tells you to get back on the wall. You climb the steps again, bow in hand, heart heavier than before. The day hasn't even begun, and already it feels like it's been a week. Up on the parapet, the pale-haired man from before offers you a half-smile, the kind you give when there's nothing good to say. You nod, settle in, and keep your eyes on the field. Somewhere out there, the wolf is moving again. The morning mist clings stubbornly to the ground, curling around the siege tower's wheels and the legs of the soldiers who guard it. From this high up on the wall, they look smaller than they should, like toys left on a damp field. You know better than to take comfort in that. The enemy is patient. They move with the slow precision of men who have done this many times before. They aren't rushing the attack, they're wearing you down. And it's working. Inside the walls, the courtyard feels cramped. Every open space has been claimed, straw beds for the sick, barrels of water, stacked bundles of arrows, pens for the livestock that couldn't be driven out before the siege began. The animals have grown restless. Their noises drift upward to the wall, the soft bleat of a goat, the low complaint of a cow that wants to graze. You find yourself assigned to watch the east gate for most of the morning. It's not where the main attack is focused, but no part of the wall is ignored during a siege. The gate is flanked by 2 towers, their wooden walkways creaking under the weight of armored men. A brazier burns faintly near the inner archway, its coals glowing dull red. An older guard, wrapped in a patched cloak, stands beside you. He tells you about another siege he survived years ago. A smaller keep, fewer men, but the same long, grinding days. It's not the arrows or the rams that break you, he says quietly, leaning on his spear. It's the waiting. You nod. You're starting to understand. The quiet stretches between attacks feel heavier than the fighting. At least in battle, there's clarity. Waiting leaves room for thoughts, and thoughts can be dangerous. By midday, the mist has burned away, leaving the field exposed. You can see the enemy camp clearly now. Rows of tents, smoke rising from their cook fires, the slow shuffle of men going about their routines. It's almost domestic if you ignore the fact that they're here to starve you out. The battering ram resumes its work at the main gate. The rhythm is slower than yesterday, deliberate, almost lazy, but each impact still echoes through the stone like a dull heartbeat. From the east wall, you can't see it, but you can feel it in the soles of your boots. When your shift ends, you head down toward the kitchen. The porridge from earlier is long gone, replaced by a thin vegetable broth that smells faintly of onions and herbs. You sip it carefully, feeling the heat spread through your chest. Around you, men talk in low voices about the sappers spotted last night. The captain has doubled the watch near the moat, but everyone knows it's a matter of time before they try again. Later in the afternoon, you're sent to carry a message to the North Tower. The path takes you past the blacksmith's shed, where the forge is still glowing despite the shortage of fuel. The smith works quickly, repairing arrowheads and mending dented helmets. He barely looks up as you pass, just grunts a greeting. His hammer falls in a steady, unbroken rhythm, a sound as much a part of the siege as the distant thud of the ram. The North Tower offers a wide view of the enemy's left flank. From here, you can see they've started building something new, smaller than the siege tower but no less threatening. A mantlet, maybe, or a frame for scaling ladders. It's covered in raw planks, men moving around it like ants. You report this to the sergeant on duty, who frowns but says nothing. By evening, the sky has gone a flat, cold gray. The wind picks up, rattling the pennants on the walls. Somewhere in the distance, a horn sounds, a low, mournful call that carries across the field. It's not an attack signal. More like a reminder, we're still here and we're not leaving. The guards on the wall grow quieter after that. Conversation fades into murmurs, and even the clatter of armor seems softer. You feel the tension settle over everyone, a shared weight pressing down like the thick clouds overhead. Night falls without a fight. Torches are lit along the walls, their flames bending in the wind. Down in the courtyard, the animals are fed from dwindling stores. A child, one of the few who made it inside before the gates closed, sits on a barrel, swinging her legs and humming to herself. It's the only sound that feels normal. As you take your place for the night watch, you notice the pale-haired crossbowman again. He's staring out at the dark field, jaw set tight. They'll try something soon, he says quietly, almost to himself. They can't keep waiting forever. You don't answer. You know he's right. The first sign of trouble comes just before dawn. You're on the west wall, leaning against the cold stone, when the faint sound of shovels reaches your ears. At first, you think it's just the wind stirring the dry grass outside the moat. But the sound doesn't fade, it grows steadier, sharper. A torch is brought over, and two archers peer into the dim gray beyond the wall. The ground there looks uneven, freshly disturbed in places. The sappers are at work again. The captain arrives quickly, his breath clouding in the cold. Orders are given in clipped, quiet tones. Buckets of water are hauled up, not for drinking but for pouring down into the suspected tunnels. The hope is to flood the work before it gets too close to the wall's foundations. From your vantage, you can see movement in the half-light, shadows ducking low, crouched figures scrambling back toward their own lines as arrows whistle through the air. The attack isn't heavy, but it's deliberate. They're testing the defenses, keeping you awake, making sure no one inside gets a full night's rest. The sappers retreat before sunrise, leaving the moat quiet again. But the silence feels different now, like a held breath. Breakfast is late and meager, a small wedge of hard cheese and a crust of bread. You chew slowly, letting it soften in your mouth before swallowing. A young boy, one of the errand runners, passes by carrying a basket of chipped arrows to be repaired. He moves quickly, eyes darting toward the wall whenever a distant shout echoes from the field. By mid-morning, the wind shifts, carrying with it the smell of their campfires. It's almost pleasant, wood smoke and something roasting, but it's a cruel reminder of what you lack. On the south wall, a small skirmish breaks out. A handful of enemy archers edge forward, loosing arrows toward the guards. The return fire is swift, and within minutes the attackers melt back into the tall grass. It's not enough to cause damage, but it's another crack in your already thin patience. Down in the courtyard, the well is lowered for the third time today. The rope creaks under the weight of the bucket. Water is still flowing, but slower now. Someone mutters a prayer under their breath. The smith is still at work, his hammer now joined by the hiss of quenching steel. Sparks leap into the dim air, briefly lighting the soot on his face. You pass him again on your way to deliver a message, and he presses a newly mended dagger into your hands to take to a sentry. The day drags. Every hour feels stretched thin, padded with long stretches of watchfulness. The men grow more restless, shifting in their armor, pacing the walkways. The women and older townsfolk in the keep's lower chambers work to patch torn clothing and weave rope from fraying hemp. It's not busy work, it's survival. Near sunset, the battering ram stirs again. This time, the blows are heavier, closer together. Dust drifts down from the gate's inner beams with every strike. Guards rush to brace it with timbers, wedging the supports tight. You stand ready with a pike, heart hammering, though the gate holds for now. When darkness settles, the enemy lights more torches than usual. They don't advance, but they want you to see them. Their camp glows with fire, a warm ring of light just beyond bowshot. It's not just intimidation. It's an unspoken message: we can wait longer than you. You lie down on a straw pallet in the guardroom, but sleep comes only in short, shallow bursts. Every creak of the wall, every gust of wind, feels like the start of another attack. Morning arrives without fanfare, no bright sunrise, no bird song. Just a slow, gray light that seeps over the ramparts and makes the frost on the stone shimmer faintly. The watch changes. Those who stood guard through the night shuffle stiffly down from the walls, their faces pale and their eyes heavy-lidded. The replacements climb the ladders with quiet determination, though their breath comes out in visible, weary clouds. You're assigned to the north wall today. From here, you can see the long stretch of open ground leading to the tree line. The enemy camp is hidden behind those trees, but faint plumes of smoke betray their presence. Somewhere beyond the timber, men are sharpening blades, repairing armor, and planning the next move. Inside the castle, the morning routine has shifted into a kind of siege rhythm. Bread rations are smaller again. This time, you're given a thin slice no larger than your palm. The cook tries to make up for it by adding a steaming mug of weak ale, but it's more for warmth than for any real sustenance. The carpenter's shed in the courtyard is busier than usual. Broken spear shafts are stacked in a corner, while new ones are being shaped from what little timber remains. Each piece of wood is treated like gold now. No scrap is wasted. Even the smallest chips are collected for kindling. Around midday, a scout returns from a short sortie beyond the south gate. He's limping slightly, and there's a gash across the side of his helmet. His report is simple: the enemy is digging again. This time they're working in two places at once, forcing the defenders to spread their attention. Buckets of water are prepared again, along with heavy stones to drop if the tunnels breach too close to the wall. The stones are awkward to lift, but they could collapse a wooden support in an instant. The sun, weak as it is, barely warms the stone under your hands. The cold seems to seep deeper into your bones now, and even the movement of pacing the wall isn't enough to drive it away. Late in the afternoon, the battering ram stirs once more, but only for a few brief, heavy strikes before falling silent. It's almost worse than a sustained attack. You're left with the uneasy feeling that it was only a test, a reminder. That night, as you settle into your blanket, you hear faint music from the enemy's camp, pipes and a low drumbeat. It's haunting, almost beautiful, but it carries a sharp undertone. They are well fed enough to play music. They have the strength to wait. You pull the blanket tighter and close your eyes, trying not to imagine how many more nights like this might come. By now the days blur together. The siege has become a kind of slow, grinding clock, its ticking marked not by hours but by ration cuts, enemy movements, and the sound of the gates being barred at dusk. Your body has adapted to the hunger in a strange way. You're no longer constantly craving food, but when you do eat, it feels as though your stomach can barely handle it. A chunk of stale bread, a few spoonfuls of thin stew, and you're full. You know this isn't a sign of strength. It's your body adjusting to survival mode. The mason's crew has been busy patching a section of wall where a catapult stone struck days ago. The repairs are crude but functional: wooden beams wedged into cracked mortar, ropes tied taut to keep the stones from shifting. It's a stopgap measure at best, and everyone knows it. One of the younger guards, barely old enough to grow a beard, collapses during his watch. The captain blames exhaustion and cold, but you've heard whispers about fever moving through the lower barracks. No one says the word plague, but the thought hangs in the air like frost. A new tactic from the enemy appears this morning: flaming arrows. They arc beautifully against the gray sky before clattering against the rooftops, each one a spark of chaos. Buckets are passed up and down the ladders in a frantic chain, and for a moment, the smell of smoke mixes with the ever-present scent of damp stone. By evening, the fires are out, but the anxiety lingers. If they keep this up, even a small lapse could mean disaster. After sunset, you hear it, the slow, methodical pounding of drums again, this time louder, closer. The sound rolls through the stone walls and into your chest. It's meant to unnerve you, and it works. You lie awake far longer than you should, staring into the darkness and wondering if the next dawn will bring a charge. The drums stop sometime before dawn, but the echo remains in your mind, like the thud of your own heartbeat. When you finally drift into a shallow sleep, you dream of footsteps on the battlements and the clink of unseen armor. It's the sort of sleep where you wake more tired than before. Morning comes reluctantly, filtered through a sky so low and heavy it feels like you could touch it if you climbed the wall. The cold has shifted, no longer sharp and biting, but damp, seeping into every seam of your clothes. The stones under your boots are slick, and the air smells faintly of smoke from yesterday's fires. At the western wall, the captain orders you to take up watch with two others. One is the baker's son, who has traded kneading dough for clutching a spear. The other is a seasoned soldier with a deep scar down his cheek, who talks only when necessary. You're given a section of wall where the enemy's camp is partially visible through the winter mist. Below, the enemy has been busy. New siege engines rise like skeletal giants. 2 more trebuchets and a crude but dangerous battering ram, its head wrapped in iron. You watch as teams of men heave ropes and hammer beams into place, their movements efficient despite the cold. There's no shouting, no wasted motion. It's not the work of amateurs. Around midday, the sky darkens unnaturally fast, and you realize they're preparing another volley. The cry goes up, incoming, and you duck behind the crenellation just as a stone the size of a wine cask hurtles past, smashing into the inner courtyard with a roar. Dust explodes upward, mixing with snowflakes in a strange, choking cloud. You're ordered to check the damage. The hit landed just shy of the granary, knocking a corner of the roof loose. Inside, sacks of grain are spilling from a cracked beam. A small group is already scrambling to gather the fallen food before it spoils in the damp. Every grain feels like gold now, and the tension in the air is palpable. Back on the wall, the scarred soldier points out something strange. The enemy's tents seem fewer today. A portion of their forces has disappeared into the treeline, and no one can agree on why. Some think they're circling to attack from another side. Others whisper of reinforcements being fetched. That night, the castle feels thinner. You can't explain it, but the air carries a kind of expectation, like everyone is holding their breath. Even the usual clatter in the kitchens is subdued. When the wind shifts, you swear you can hear faint voices from beyond the wall, too soft to understand but unmistakably human. Later, when you finally lie down, you keep your boots on, just in case. The wake-up isn't gentle. A horn splits the early morning stillness so loud it feels like it shakes the marrow in your bones. You're on your feet before you're even fully awake, grabbing your cloak and rushing toward the wall. The air outside bites hard, each breath turning into a puff of mist that's quickly torn away by the wind. From the battlements, you see them, figures emerging from the treeline where last night's mystery movement vanished. Not dozens, hundreds. They're carrying ladders, planks, and bundles of something you can't quite make out at first. Tar-soaked bundles, it turns out, when the first one lands aflame against the outer palisade. The fire flares, spitting sparks into the wind. Orders bark from the captain's mouth so fast it's hard to keep up. Archers to the west wall. Oil to the gates. Stones ready at the parapets. You take your position, hands gripping the spear so tightly your knuckles ache. The enemy advances in rhythm, shields raised, ladders slamming against the walls with a heavy thunk. The first one comes up right where you're standing. You thrust downward, catching a helmeted head and sending its wearer tumbling back into the press of bodies below. Another climbs before you can breathe, eyes locked on yours, teeth bared in a grimace. It's close enough that you smell the iron of his armor mixed with the smoke in the air. Somewhere to your left, boiling oil spills over the wall with a hiss that turns to a scream. The attackers recoil, but the gaps close quickly. A second ladder appears. Then a third. You stab, push, retreat 2 steps, and stab again. Hours blur together in the chaos. At some point you notice the battering ram has begun to move. It rolls toward the gate like some monstrous insect, covered by a roof of damp hides to protect against fire. Archers rain arrows down, some catching gaps in the covering, but the ram never stops. The dull, rhythmic thud of its head slamming against the gate begins, once, twice, then over and over like a war drum. Inside the yard, carpenters and soldiers reinforce the gate with whatever they can find, beams, barrels, even pieces of furniture. A wagon is dragged into place and tipped onto its side for extra bracing. Every blow from the ram shudders through the courtyard floor and up into your bones. And yet, amid the fear, there's a strange stillness in your mind. You focus on the next ladder, the next thrust, the next step back. You notice odd details. The way the frost clings to the ropes, the hiss of torches when snowflakes land on them, the rhythm of boots on the stone steps behind you. Historians still argue whether siege warfare was more about endurance than outright force. But here, in this moment, it feels like both are trying to crush you equally. By late afternoon, the attack falters. The ladders are withdrawn, the ram is pulled back, and the enemy melts once more into the treeline. What's left on the ground is a mess of splintered wood, scorched hides, and the unmoving forms of those who didn't make it back. You finally let your shoulders drop. Your arms feel like they've been carved from stone, heavy and stiff. But you're still here, and so is the wall. The night after the assault is eerily quiet, and that silence feels almost more dangerous than the battle itself. You stand on the wall again, staring out toward the treeline, half expecting to see shadows darting between the trunks. The moon is high tonight, a pale coin hanging in the black, casting the snow in a ghostly glow. Every footstep in the frost sounds far too loud. Down in the courtyard, fires burn in great braziers, but the light only reaches so far before surrendering to darkness. Figures huddle around the flames. Some soldiers, some villagers who've taken refuge in the castle since the siege began. Everyone's faces are drawn tight, their eyes scanning the gates whenever a sound breaks the stillness. The damage from the day's attack is worse than it first appeared. One section of the wall leans slightly inward, its stones cracked from repeated strikes. The carpenters work by torchlight, hauling heavy timbers into place to brace it until morning. The main gate, though still standing, bears deep scars from the battering ram, splinters and grooves that run almost halfway through its thickness. It's sobering to see just how close the enemy came. Food supplies have taken another hit. With the outer storage building burned during yesterday's fight, you're now relying entirely on what's inside the keep. It's not much: barrels of grain, salted meat, a few wheels of cheese. Even the beer is running low, and the water barrels have to be checked constantly for contamination. You find yourself chewing slower at dinner, trying to make each bite feel like more. Somewhere in the keep, a small group of children play quietly, using carved wooden figures to act out a battle. You watch them for a moment, struck by how strange it is that they giggle in the shadow of real danger. But maybe it's their way of pretending this is all a story, something that will end happily when they wake up tomorrow. Later in the night, the captain makes his rounds. His voice is low but firm, checking on each guard, asking about arrow counts, oil supplies, and the condition of the walls. He doesn't smile, but his presence has a steadiness to it. You cling to that steadiness because everything else feels uncertain. Hours pass in the cold, and you catch yourself drifting, your mind slipping into that half-dream state where time bends. Then faintly you hear it, the creak of wood from somewhere beyond the gate. Not a loud sound, but deliberate. You strain your ears, holding your breath. It comes again, followed by a muffled metallic clank. The watchman to your right glances at you, eyes narrowing. Without a word, he motions to the captain. A few men move quietly to the murder holes above the gate, peering into the darkness. One raises a hand, 3 fingers. 3 figures are at the gate. Saboteurs maybe, or scouts. A signal is given, and 2 buckets of cold ash are poured through the murder holes, smothering whatever light the intruders might have been using. There's a muffled curse in a language you don't understand, then the sound of retreating footsteps fading into the night. For the rest of your shift, you keep your eyes fixed forward, waiting for movement. But the enemy doesn't return, not tonight. Still, the knowledge that they were bold enough to approach the gate under the cover of darkness gnaws at you. Historians still argue whether most sieges were truly constant pressure or just bursts of violence separated by long stretches of waiting. Standing here in the cold, you're living the answer: both. The fighting comes in waves, but the waiting, that's the part that wears you down. By the time your shift ends, the eastern horizon is beginning to pale. You descend the wall, boots slipping on the frost, and head toward a bed that suddenly feels like the most valuable treasure in the entire castle. Sleep takes you before you even feel the straw beneath your cheek. Dawn comes pale and thin, more a suggestion of light than any true warmth. The siege has stretched on long enough that you've stopped marking the days. You only measure time now in meals, guard shifts, and the occasional heart-pounding clashes when the enemy tests the walls. This morning, though, feels different, not quieter, not exactly, but calmer, like the air itself is holding its breath. You're on the wall again, looking down at the field where so much has happened. The snow is churned and gray from countless boots, littered with broken arrows and abandoned weapons. In the far distance, the enemy camp still smolders with its cooking fires. No one is moving toward you, and that almost makes you more nervous. Inside the castle, life continues in its strange, suspended way. The blacksmith hammers away at bent swords, trying to make them usable again. The baker works in short bursts, conserving flour, turning out small, dense loaves that everyone treats like gold. The well is guarded constantly. Water has become just as much a weapon as steel. One odd thing you notice today is the way sound carries in the cold. From the wall, you hear a hoarse snort in the enemy camp, even though it's far away. Somewhere behind you in the castle yard, a child laughs at something, the sound floating upward and over the battlements. In these strange, drawn-out moments, the siege feels less like a battle and more like a strange, unwelcome season that everyone is waiting to end. By midday, a group of messengers returns from a risky run outside the walls. They bring back 2 pieces of news. One, that a relief force is rumored to be on the march, and two, that the enemy has lost more men to sickness than to your arrows. It's a small comfort, but a comfort nonetheless. Historians still argue whether sieges were won more by starvation and disease than by actual fighting. From up here, watching the slow dance of survival and attrition, you start to think the answer is obvious. Battles are quick, starvation is patient. The rest of the day passes in a strange mix of tension and routine. Repairs continue, sentries keep their eyes open, and everyone speaks in lower voices, as though afraid to disturb the fragile balance. When evening falls, you eat another small, careful meal and walk the walls one last time. The sky is clear, filled with stars so sharp they look like you could cut yourself on them. You breathe out, and your breath becomes a white cloud that drifts away into the darkness. The fires in the enemy camp flicker weakly, like they too are tiring of this long game. You find yourself wondering how much longer you'll be here. Days? Weeks? Months? And whether the end will come as a sudden roar of battle or a quiet morning with the gates swinging open to freedom. For now, though, you keep your post, one more shadow among many on the castle wall, waiting for whatever tomorrow brings. And now, as the night stretches deep and the siege walls fade from sight, you feel the weight of the day's vigilance settle into something softer. The cold stone beneath your hands is no longer a barrier, but an anchor, steady, unmoving, holding you in a place where nothing can rush you. The fires in the courtyard burn low, embers drifting upward in lazy spirals, disappearing into the still, dark air. Your steps grow slower as you walk away from the battlements. The murmured voices of the guards fade behind you, replaced by the quiet hush of the keep. In the dim glow of torchlight, the hallways seem longer, the shadows deeper, every sound muted as though the castle itself has decided to rest. You find your way to your chamber, a simple space but warm. The straw mattress is uneven, but tonight it feels like the most luxurious bed you've ever known. The blanket is heavy across your shoulders, and your muscles loosen under its weight. Somewhere far away, the wind brushes against the outer walls, a low, constant hum that is more lullaby than warning. Your breathing slows, each inhale deep, each exhale a little longer, a little softer. The images of the siege, of stone walls, distant fires, and watchful eyes, blur and drift, becoming less a memory of danger and more a gentle backdrop to your rest. The castle is still standing. You are still here. And for now that is enough. Let your thoughts quiet. Let the stone walls fade. Let the cold air outside be just a distant whisper. The night is long and you have all the time you need to drift deeper into sleep.